Welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking time in the middle of the day out of your busy schedule to spend some time with us, uh, going through just some of the broader details of the Willamette Valley System Supplemental EIS. The intent of this afternoon's meeting and the meeting that we'll have this evening is to provide a kind of a broad overview to the SEIS and what we were trying to achieve in this document, in this analysis, so that kind of gearing folks up for the public information sessions that we have planned later in early next month. And we'll talk about what those meetings are for and how we will collect comment on this document. This is the public comment period, which opened last Friday. But we will not be taking public comment today. This is really an orientation session to this really complicated document that's out and available for folks to review. Just a reminder, we're recording this information. And so any personal information that you share when we get to the comment period or the question and answer period is something that would be made public. So keep that in mind. We will keep both the chat and the questions off until we get through the technical presentation, and then we'll work through the Q&A session at the end. Kathy, do you want to bump to slide 3? Still not seeing it, Kathy, if it's happened. Bear with us, folks. Looks like we had a little bit of a technical challenge here. There we go. Yeah, just a quick introduction. My name is Dustin Bankson. I am the operations project manager for the Willamette Valley and Rogue Basin projects. I have been in the Willamette Valley, part of the Portland district, for over 30 years. And, you know, there's a saying that says, may you live in interesting times. And it's certainly been interesting for me to see the evolution of our system, the demands on that system, and how we are working within the limits of existing infrastructure, legal requirements, the things that nature brings us that are somewhat predictable and somewhat unpredictable, to try to balance this entire system and achieve the best balance of benefits, limit the impacts that we can for something that's become so important to folks that live within the Willamette Valley and the region. Today, Kathy, do you want to go to the next slide? What we want to make sure we do is just talk to why we're here today, the importance of providing feedback to this additional supplement to our EIS update that we'll talk about in some detail in a little bit. I always try to take an opportunity to give you a quick overview of the system, depending on your familiarity with it. And then we'll talk through a couple of the very specific objectives that I think are piquing people's interest with the supplemental EIS, and that is an alternative that's evaluated for ending hydropower in the Willamette, and then an additional measure that came as part of our BIOP for the supplemental EIS, and that's the proposed deep drawdown for fish passage at Detroit Reservoir. At the end, again, we'll open this back up and have an opportunity for questions and answers. Myself, another presenter, Kathy Warner, and a few other technical folks that we have online will do our best to answer your questions. Next slide, Kathy. I throw this slide in just, as a reminder of what and how much of an altered system we live in, with 2/3 of the population in the state of Oregon in the Willamette Valley. The footprint in the Willamette Valley and where people are, our industry, our lives would be very different, but for the construction and the operation of the Willamette system. And, periodically it becomes necessary for us, either based on changing requirements in the most recent issues have been around listed species under the Endangered Species Act, to reevaluate the impacts of this system on the environment around us and kind of review how we operate it and do the best we can to provide benefits and minimize impacts. And that's what brings us to today. Now, next slide, Kathy. As we look at that, I think it's important to understand where we get our authority from. And both the construction of these projects and then the purposes that we operate them for are baked into authorities, to laws that evolved over time in the Willamette. Going back to the late 30s, where you saw flood control acts passed that allowed the Corps to evaluate alternatives and then ultimately to construct infrastructure to help manage the frequent and pervasive flooding that occurred in the system, as well as provide benefits that we'll talk about in a little bit. But additional authorities over time, both authorizing projects for construction and then defining what we operate them for, happened over a period of years, ultimately leading to the last project at Blue River being constructed in '69. And so from that span of time, over 50 years, as the project is fully complete, we have been operating this system for a long time in largely consistent ways, but then in the more near term, in the last 20 years or so, with some significant changes to try to address impacts that we are aware of relative to listed fish in the basin. Next slide, Kathy. Now, when we talk about those authorities, we really are speaking to, what we ended up with were this series of dams, all of which are slightly different. Their locations spread out across the basin, their design slightly different. And so as we try to manage these, I'll call them changing or dynamic requirements, we're largely doing it with the same infrastructure that was constructed over 50 years ago, or even longer in some cases. And so within that infrastructure that we have in place today, and as we look at alternatives for the future, we look at a combination of operating with what we've got, modifying those systems in some way, which could require structural alternatives. And we'll talk about those alternatives that were evaluated in the SEIS that was published back in April. But we have to try to work with what we have until some of those additional authorizations and the funding, the appropriations that come with them, materialize. And so we are working through that balance right now, both of meeting requirements that we have redefined under the 24 BIOP, and as we look toward a few additional requirements that we've analyzed in the supplemental EIS, how do we manage those, meet those expectations in an informed way and in the best way possible? Next slide, Kathy. The system itself, and I put this up because I know it's very easy to focus solely on the dams. We have 13 what we call multi-purpose projects in the Willamette Valley. 2 of those dams themselves are re-regulating dams that help us manage kind of peak power production, or historically have helped us manage peak power demands, as well as flows downstream and some risk downstream. But in addition to the dams, would include things like the mitigation fish hatcheries that were constructed, the navigation channel, or the authorities around navigation. That was part of the original authorization going from Corvallis down to the Portland Harbor. Willamette Falls locks, which I think many folks are familiar with, and then hundreds of miles of bank protection that has evolved over time and, is something that is evolving as we speak today. As the system ages, maintenance has been either done or not done, and those requirements change for us going forward. Next slide, Kathy. Those authorized purposes, and we'll talk about what we operate for, but focusing on that top left, that flood risk management purpose is really our prime driver. That's a life safety critical mission. I've heard it described as a pass-fail mission for the Corps. And so anything that we evaluated in the SEIS or in the supplemental EIS does not come or cannot come at the expense of public safety or dam safety. So as that kind of big primary driver, we look at all of those other authorizations, those other authorities and purposes that we manage for at these projects, and how can we achieve the best balance of those within our current limitations in infrastructure and our requirements, be they legal requirements or what is most beneficial for some of the target species downstream. But those benefits are something that are constantly being evaluated based on what we have to work with, and that is typically how much water we store in the system when we talk about the resource or the resource that we're negotiating. Next slide. So we do this, in a pretty consistent and disciplined way. primarily for the purposes of risk management. So this is what we call the rule curve or a water control diagram. And just from an orientation standpoint, along the top, you see us moving during months of the year from major flood season to conservation storage season. So when we're trying to capture as much water as we can in the system within the limitations of dam safety, hydrology or forecast capability, and now some additional requirements to try to improve fish passage in parts of the system. That conservation use system plays out over the summer months in terms of both water quality and kind of meeting tributary targets. And then we start to pull those pools down historically in a pretty consistent way to try to achieve that minimum conservation pool level in early December so that we have storage available to us to manage those seasonal flood risks. Now that conservation use season and that back into the curve for some projects has changed fairly substantially as we work to improve on our ability to pass fish using operational measures while we anticipate or look toward the potential for structural modifications to the system over time. We're also passing fish again on that front end during conservation storage season. So, as Kathy talks through alternatives and you look at these, remember that not only are we trying to pass fish through measures like deep drawdowns, we are also trying to store water so that we can pass fish during peak storage periods of the year. And spill is another method that we use. So there's a really strong driver on the front end of conservation storage system for us to store as much water as we can in the system for that benefit and other benefits as well. It's a difficult challenge, and that blue shaded conservation storage area is one that is not only always in conversation and discussion on how we do the best with what we can, but it's unpredictable based on, and we'll talk a little bit about this year. If you go to the next slide, we do that kind of negotiation every year. We have a term for it now called adaptive management, but really we have been operating this system in a collaborative way for a long, long time. And so as we look to try to optimize our operation, meet our legal requirements in that framework, we're working to bring new tools online to try to help us do that in a risk-informed way. And that is a challenging exercise every year because every year is different. And you're looking at a current snapshot of the Willamette teacup diagram. It is a great reference if you want to understand where we are in terms of system storage. If you click on any of those orange little hash marks, which represent the dams, so if you were to go to Green Peter today and click on that orange hash mark, you can see current pool level, projected pool level over the next 7 days, but you can also see information on turbidity, which has become increasingly important and a point of interest for communities as we've modified these operations during this fall drawdown cycle. So I would encourage you to get familiar, find that Willamette teacup diagram link. There's a lot of information there that can help you stay informed on where we are year to year. And with that, I'm going to transition over to Kathy Warner, who's our technical lead for the Willamette SEIS, and she's going to walk us through some of the details of the supplemental EIS SEIS that was published last Friday. Kathy?
All right, thank you, Dustin. Always a great intro for this. So I will step you through the purpose for what we are here for. As soon as we get to the next slide again. There we go. All right. So as Dustin mentioned before, the Corps published a final environmental impact statement in April this year. And in that document, we analyzed the environmental, social benefits and impacts as well of 7 different alternatives on how to operate and maintain the system of dams and reservoirs known as the Willamette Valley system. So these alternatives contained a variety of operational and structural changes designed to improve both flow, downstream flow and water management, water quality, namely TD, total dissolved gas, and temperature management, and then fish passage, both upstream and downstream. So this document also identified what's called a preferred alternative, or what the Corps identified as the one way we think is the best way to move forward and manage the system into the future. And that alternative included operational and structural changes for the above mentioned. So flow management, water temperature, as well as fish passage, both downstream and upstream as needed. So the EIS looked at impacts over a 30-year period of time. So what would these impacts look like for the next 30 years? As part of this the environmental impact statement published in April, it also included a set of interim operations, and these are different ways that the Corps would be operating the dams and reservoirs until a long-term plan for that fish passage or temperature management that's identified as part of the preferred alternative, until those plans are online and working, and we're operating towards those. So why are we here today? So why are we preparing another document when we just published one? So in January of 2025, the president signed into law what's called the Water Resources Development Act of 2024. As part of this act, the Corps was directed to not complete and finish our documents until we include an alternative that analyzes ceasing hydropower operations or ending those hydropower generation and operation in the Willamette Valley system. The second reason why we are preparing this supplemental environmental impact statement is because of the December 2024, the National Marine Fisheries Service issued what's called a biological opinion on the operation and maintenance of the Willamette Valley system. As part of this biological opinion, there's one aspect of it that was not included in our previous environmental documentation, and that's the deeper drawdown at Detroit Reservoir. And we'll talk about both of these actions on the next few slides. So going forward, as part of the environmental documentation, what's the purpose and need of this document itself, right? So what that is the same as what was for the final environmental impact statement from April 2025. And it's the continued operation of the Willamette Valley system for specific authorized project purposes. And that's really important as we move forward, right? The Congress authorized the Corps and this Willamette Valley system for multiple authorized purposes that Dustin talked about previously. But we also need to be in compliance with the environmental impact, the Endangered Species Act, and other applicable laws and regulations. So I'm going to jump right into the two aspects that we are looking at with this supplemental environmental impact statement. We're naming this, the slide is titled Alternative 6, and that is the alternative or other way of operating the dam with ending hydropower operations at the Willamette Valley system dams. So we needed to first figure out, well, how do we end the hydropower? How do we cease operating for hydropower while still operating for other purposes? So we looked at a couple different ways of doing that, called partial deauthorization and full deauthorization. So partial means we won't operate for full hydropower as we do now, but we would operate and produce hydropower just enough to maintain operation of the dam itself. So enough power to turn the lights on, enough power to open and close the gates that are already need power to do so. The full deauthorization means no power. We would not produce any hydropower, but we would also not use the penstocks, which is the outlet that goes from the reservoir to the powerhouse to generate that power. And so we would plug the penstock, we'd fill it up, close it off, no water would go through that penstock. Both of those options result in dam safety risks because we would not be able to de-water or stop using the other outlets of the dam in order and still have flow going past the dam. So we need to be able to do maintenance and inspection of the other outlets of the dam. If we plug the penstock or we're not using it to its full capacity, we're not able to provide enough flow downstream, and that does create the dam safety risk. Another option was looking at a new outlet, just a whole new hole through the dam, and that was also deemed to have some dam safety risks. And so therefore those three options were screened out. Another topic that comes up sometimes is dam removal. So when Congress wrote this act, it said cease hydropower operations, don't produce hydropower. It didn't say anything about stop all of your other authorized purposes. So if we remove the dam, we would cease hydropower, but we would also no longer be able to provide that flood risk management or satisfy the other authorized project purposes of these dams and reservoirs. So that one was beyond the scope of what we're looking at right now. So that left us with this other option, which is a full deauthorization, but still being able to use the penstocks, that pipe, to provide flow and water past the dam. So this is the one we looked at and moved forward with in terms of satisfying how to operate the dams without hydropower. But then next, we needed to develop a full alternative. So reconfiguring the penstocks gets us one step further, but now we needed to figure out how to still operate the dams and reservoirs in compliance with our other authorized purposes, as well as being in compliance with the Endangered Species Act. And so looking at that, we figured out, well, how do we do it? Our key elements of this alternative are going to be decommissioning the hydropower and reconfiguring the penstock to maintain flow through it. We also need to provide fish passage and temperature management and still operate the dams for all the other authorized purposes. One note here is the Dorena Dam has a private hydropower facility, and that would still continue because it's not a federal hydropower operation and facility itself. So moving into more of the details of this alternative and ways to operate it. So we are including the actions that are part of the biological opinion from 2024. Those include a temperature and downstream passage structure at Detroit Reservoir, an adult fish facility at Green Peter. So we still need to move the adult fish above the dam. So that's how we're going to be doing that with an adult fish facility. For downstream fish passage at Green Peter, there'd be a spring spill and the fall drawdown. And then at Cougar, we're looking at an operation as well. That'd be a spring and fall drawdown at Cougar Reservoir, and that's going all the way down to the diversion tunnel itself. There'd be a fish passage structure at Lookout Point, and then some lamprey passage features at the adult fish collection facilities. A little bit more specific on the hydropower reconfiguration. So what are we going to do with these outlets so we can still use them to pass flow without generating hydropower? So the facilities themselves and the design of these structures are including that water going through and down the penstock and into what's called a powerhouse and through the turbines. So that turbine is producing power, hydropower, but it's also taking the energy out of the water itself. And so we have to reconfigure that pipe to dissipate that energy. And so that involves putting either new structures within the pipe itself or at the end of the pipe. And that's a cone valve, and that dissipates the energy. We would also be removing all the hydropower infrastructure, including the powerhouse systems and the features associated with that. Another key feature is, since we wouldn't be producing hydropower, we would have to replace power to operate the dam and the other features on this site. So we would have to be getting power off of the system instead of providing power to the system. A couple key effects from this alternative itself would be no hydropower, right? We would lose all hydropower generation. And there would be a lower downstream survival of the fish compared to alternative 5, which was the preferred alternative identified in April 2025. And that lower downstream survival is due to the reconfigured penstocks. So both the preferred alternative and this no hydropower alternative have the same structures and operations for fish passage, but because of these reconfigured penstocks, they are actually not as fish friendly as would be a penstock and the turbines themselves. There's also expected to be increased total dissolved gas, which is just like the bubbles and such within the water downstream of the dam, And that's due to these cone valves and how they would operate in this scenario. It's also the highest cost, and that's because it has all those other features of the preferred alternative, but it also has all the cost associated with decommissioning the dams, removing the hydropower facilities, and reconstructing those penstocks or reconfiguring the penstocks. Now we'll get into the other high interest topic with this supplemental environmental impact statement. So as I discussed earlier, the final environmental impact statement included a set of interim operations that are designed to improve fish passage, as well as temperature management until a long-term action is in place. So this slide includes all of the actions by subbasin from the north, south, Saniams, the Mackenzie, and then the Middle Fork, Willamette. So I want to focus in on the Detroit drawdown. So this is the action that was identified in the biological opinion in late 2024, and we needed to include an environmental assessment or an evaluation of this action. I hope everyone can see the slide. Okay, I know the print is a little bit small. So the focus of this one is it's an interim operation required by that biological opinion. And the focus of it is that we would be drawing the reservoir down to provide that safe, surface-oriented route for fish passage for the juveniles moving downstream of the dam. And as we draw the reservoir down, the fish are oriented towards that more surface outlet. The drawdown would go to elevation 1395 feet, and that's about 55 feet lower than the normal winter pool. So Dustin showed the rule curve earlier, that water control diagram. So in the winter timeframe, we are already down to elevation 1450, and that's how we go down to that elevation every single winter. So this drawdown would be an additional 50 feet lower than the winter pool. It's about 30 feet lower than we've been since the reservoir was constructed. We have gone down to elevation 1425 in the past, so this would be that additional 30 feet. So as we developed how we were going to do this required drawdown, we were looking at how to configure it to minimize effects and impacts. So we're looking at that December timeframe. Like I said, we're already down lower in the reservoir. And it's not during the summer, it's right during the winter timeframe, that late fall, early winter timeframe. We'd also be looking at a multi-year stepwise approach. So there's not a target elevation for this operation the first year as we would be doing it. We'd be going slowly, stepping down. And that, again, is to minimize the effects from turbidity and material moving downstream. So I want to really focus on that aspect of it, the turbidity aspect and the mobilization of sediment. We're all familiar with the Green Peter operation and what's resulted in that regard. So the graphic here on the right hand of the slide, shows the difference between the Green Peter and the Detroit operation. So the Green Peter reservoir aerial photo or aerial view is on the top, and the Detroit is on the bottom. So that blue outline, which is the largest area, that's the normal summer pool elevation and footprint of the reservoir. The yellow is the normal wintertime or minimum conservation pool elevation of the reservoirs. And then the hatch mark, kind of a gray shade, is what would be the drawdown pool footprint. So as you can see, the Green Peter operation, there's a very large difference between the normal winter elevation and the drawdown elevation. Compared to Detroit, there's much less exposed sediment and reservoir bed under what would be under the Detroit operation. And what's shown is at elevation 1395. So the the target elevation after multiple years is what is shown there. So the timing was also proposed to minimize impacts to the conservation storage. Again, it's during the operation would be after the peak seasons. It would be in the middle, at the start of the flood risk management season. We'd also be looking at turbidity triggers to inform that annual step and even that intra-season as we're doing the operation. There would be turbidity triggers to maybe perhaps then limit how far we go as we're trying to lower the reservoir incrementally. And we talked about how the sediment bed and the exposed sediment would be much less than the green peter operation. So we've also done some initial sediment sampling at Detroit Reservoir and the sediments there, and the sediments are considered clean from a sediment quality perspective. I know we are hearing certainly a lot from the water quality perspective and the impacts to downstream users, but also want to touch on the reservoir itself and the recreation aspect. So the timing of this reservoir drawdown was done to minimize impacts to peak recreation season. It would be done during the winter timeframe. And so the graph on this slide, try and walk through it and really focusing on the bottom aspect of it. So this purple line, the singular line, is at the very bottom, and then the top of the white band. So I want to focus on those two aspects because that's where you can see a little bit of a difference. So this graph represents, in general, what the conditions of the reservoir would be like from a modeled perspective in very dry years. So I want to make sure to note that the lines on this graph are not one singular year, but a compilation of multiple years over the period of record and what would happen on any single day in those very dry years for the purple and the white lines. So the top of that white band is what's called a 5%. It's at the very dry year. What would happen under current conditions? I should say current conditions of what we're doing right now at Detroit. So in a very dry year, that we are not able to fill the reservoirs, and Detroit Reservoir specifically also, because we just don't have the water incoming to the system. So Detroit and the reservoirs are rain-driven systems. So we refill these reservoirs based on late winter and early spring rainfall. If that rainfall does not come, then we're not able to fill those reservoirs. So as you can see, the white line, what we would do right now, we're not able to fill the reservoirs up to those boat ramp elevations that are in the upper end of Detroit Reservoir. It still does get above the Mongold, which is that low reservoir elevation at that minimum conservation pool. So with this drawdown, there could be a delay in how soon we get above the Mongold boat ramp and that low elevation boat ramp, but we would still get above it. There'd still be times where we would get to that Mongold boat ramp. We would still not get to all of the boat ramps, but we don't do that now under very dry years either. And so how we would operate and deal with that would be done and determined on that annual basis and in reservoir, in management, in season management. So again, what this graph is showing is modeled data and what it would look like. Water management would be more adaptive to the actual on the ground conditions. From a resident fish perspective, the impacts to kokanee are expected. Impacts could include fewer kokanee and other resident game fish remaining in the reservoir. Okay. With that, I want to take the opportunity to thank our cooperating agencies. We have the same cooperating agencies for the supplemental environmental impact statement as we did for the final. And that includes the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, Bonneville Power Administration, NIMS, or National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, National Marine Fisheries Service. We've got U.S. Fish and Wild Service, Bureau of Reclamation, EPA, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, Oregon Water Resources Department, Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, and Oregon Department of Agriculture. Another one we want to hit on here is how to comment. How can you provide us with these comments? So we have a 45-day comment period, and that's running from November 14th through December 29th. So December 29th is a Monday. I just want to make sure we highlight the day of the week as well. So all public comments will be included in the official record. You can submit public comments in writing or via email at the following addresses. So we have the Willamette email address right here. If you're going to submit the comment, please add Willamette Valley System draft SEIS in the subject line of your email, and the mailing address is there as well. From an agency contact, Liz Oliver is our project manager for this project. So there's a written email, written snail mail method of getting in touch there. So we have today this virtual meeting. We also have one this evening. And we have three in-person meetings coming up. We'll be meeting in Detroit, the city of Detroit, on December 6th, Saturday from 10 to noon. And then we'll have 2 meetings in person in Salem on Wednesday, December 10th. So we'll have a noon meeting as well as a 5:30 p.m. meeting. And those are at the Salem Broadway Commons building. And we have a couple links here for the EIS, the web page itself, and then there's a YouTube video that gives an overview of the supplemental environmental impact statement. And with that, we'll move into Q&A.
Right. Thank you so much, Kathy. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kelly James. I'm a planner and public involvement specialist, and I'm going to be moderating the Q&A session today. I appreciate you all making time to be here. I have turned on the chat, so you are welcome to enter any questions you have for the presenters or our technical staff here in the room and online, and we will do our best to answer your questions. Note that this is really just an information session to help orient you to the document, for you to be able to provide comments via these various pathways shown on the screen. So in some cases, we may not be able to answer your question. We may direct you actually to the document itself, but we'll do our best. So I would like to invite you now to please enter any questions. We'll give you a minute to collect your thoughts. At the end, if we have time, I noticed there are quite a few folks that have called in and won't be able to enter in a chat question. So if we do have time, I'll go one by one through the numbers and state the final 4 numbers and unmute you to give you an opportunity to ask a question if you would desire that. We have, such limited time that we will likely only be able to give you 2 minutes to ask your question, and then I'll have to mute you probably pretty quickly to let folks answer. So we currently have a question up here, and I will read it out loud, and then our folks in the room will offer some answers. In the presentation, Catherine, you mentioned that with the stopping of hydropower generation from the Detroit Dam, the drawdowns, among other dam activities, would be using energy from the system rather than giving power to the system. Did the increase of energy use on the power grid show up in utility costs for the community?
The utility costs is, that was something we did not look at. That is beyond the scope of the USACE actions.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, and it is really not something that's within our control to comment on. That's the role of the Bonneville Power Administration to determine both the marketing and costs associated with that. So again, that's not something that we evaluated as part of this. We did determine that we would be using more power rather than producing it to modify the facilities in these ways.
And just a reminder, any questions asked today are not a part of the record. So if you would like your question or comment in the chat to be a part of the record, please send it in via one of the methods on the screen, either via email or through snail mail at the address. Thank you. Any further questions in the chat? Giving some time for folks to think, I'll go ahead and check in with our participants on the phone. So if you are on a telephone and not on the WebEx, you might be on both, so apologies to those who are both. I'm going to quickly go down the line. It looks like we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 folks on telephone. Starting with the first one, I see the number ending in 5385. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. You can either say no question or you can ask a question, and then I can mute you again once you're finished. So again, number ending in 5385. And you'll likely get a prompt to press *6 if you would like to unmute. You're still muted. Right. Hearing nothing from 5385, I have another question in the chat. Could we hear more on how the Army Corps plans on addressing potential increase in turbidity sediment levels with the extra 50 feet of drawdown from the Detroit Dam?
I'm sorry. Yeah, so this is Kathy with the Corps. So in that regard, we are looking at specific turbidity triggers, and we'll be working with the downstream providers on that more detailed implementation plan and the needs for them.
Yeah, maybe to add on to that response, I would say that first I would like to really thank both cities of Salem and Staten who have been engaged in this discussion along the way and really brought to us a lot of specific information and understanding about the limitations of their systems so that we can work to shape these operations in ways that try to achieve objectives and minimize that impact. But different than maybe with a picture that folks have in their head of what deep drawdown looked like at Green Peter or Lookout Point as an example, that slow stepping into that process as we evaluate both turbidity and impacts to the system, giving us an opportunity to kind of step in and step out of that as we learn more about it, is a significant difference than what we were doing under more specific court-directed actions. And some of what we have in place now in the South San Em and in the Middle Fork in communication with water system providers and processes to evaluate risk and communicate decision points will be used and is working well for us in those systems and will be used to build onto what we will be doing at Detroit potentially in the future. So there is some both process and lessons learned that we're taking from these existing operations that I believe we can apply in the North San Em that will help us manage that risk.
Thanks, Dustin. Next question is, do you feel 45 days is adequate time to consume such a vast amount of information affecting us for the next 30 years? So 45-day comment period.
Hi, this is Liz Oliver. I'm the project manager. Thank you for your question. We definitely recognize this is a lot of information to consume. I would say 45 days is the typical amount of time, but you'll also see in the document that this is kind of a programmatic look at the system and other actions that are within the document. There will be additional environmental analysis and additional time to comment on those individual projects. So this isn't the final say on what happens for the next 30 years. And will be available in those public meetings in Detroit and Salem for folks to ask questions as well. So there's multiple opportunities to get, clarifications on your concerns.
Yes. So I see in the chat that question, did the Army Corps of Engineers consider using suction dredging in order to remove some of the sediment volume prior to drawdown to reduce impacts. And we've got an answer from one of our colleagues here in the Corps in the chat. This is not analyzed in the EIS. If you would like to see that type of analysis, please submit that as a comment. While we wait for maybe some additional comments in the chat, I'll go ahead and check in with our folks on the phone. Next person up was a number ending in 8416. I'm going to go ahead and allow you to unmute yourself by pressing *6. That worked. Yep. Do you have a question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, my question is there any information available, or did we gather any data from the South St. Anne on the effect on the fish and the spawning grounds that are all located below the dam? Will the drawdown have effects on those spawning grounds and those fish?
Thank you for the question. Greg Taylor on the line. You're welcome to answer this question. We also have Rich Frizowski in the room, our two fish biologists. I'll let them duke it out.
Hi, this is Rich Pyskowski, Corps of Engineers fish biologist. We do monitor the sediment levels, turbidity in particular, coming downstream. Direct estimates of the amount of sediment on top of Chinook reds that were placed during the last couple of years. That's usually those spawning activities are happening primarily in the month of September. Haven't been directly monitored. However, we have general observations that are occurring in the rivers downstream, and much of the material has been fine or in solution, and it's moving downstream. It is not settling out within the river channels downstream of the dams. There could be potentially more sampling done, and if you recommend that, please add a comment through the email or on snail mail. Thank you.
All right, Greg, apologies, you were unable to unmute, but I have allowed you to unmute. So if you'd like to add anything, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add. Maybe one thing to add to one of the older drawdowns. We actually did look at this issue down below Cougar Dam. And so in those studies, what we did is we characterized some of the reds that were down below Cougar Dam that had been exposed to during a drawdown. And we didn't see any changes in the permeability or how well water kind of flowed through those reds based on some of that monitoring. So that kind of adds to what Rich was saying. Again, this material that making it through these reservoirs and these types of drawdowns has to float through a multi-mile long reservoir. So it's the finest of finest stuff that really wants to stay in suspension. And so we're just not seeing those types of impacts with these kind of drawdowns.
Thanks, Greg. All right, I'm still not seeing any other comments in the chat, so I'll go to the next caller. Number ending in 1885. I'll go ahead and open up your mic, and you can press *6 if you'd like to ask a question. No question?
No questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. Right, next number is ending in 0699. 0699, I'll go ahead and open up your line. You can press *6 to unmute if you'd like.
Oh, no questions, thank you.
Great, thank you. Then our last number is ending in 4903. You should be able to press *6.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. That's the last of the numbers online. Going back to the chat, we are happy to stay here until the top of the hour. Got about 8 minutes left, so if you have any questions, feel free. All right, I do have one here. It says, will there be a conversation and possible reinitiation of the upper and lower Bennett dams so that there will be more accurate count of returning adult fish?
Rich Pieskowski, Corps of Engineers fish biologist. Previously, the Corps of Engineers has funded ODFW to operate fish counting stations at Bennett Dam fish ladders. Currently, those activities are not funded. And whether ODFW is doing any activities, I am not currently aware. If you recommend any additional monitoring activities, please add that to a comment to the Corps of Engineers.
Right, another question here. Did you say there will be an impact to kokanee fishery? If so, is it quantified? Greg or Rich?
Yeah, I mean, Cam, kind of the bottom line is anytime you do one of these types of drawdowns, I mean, of course, the goal is to pass, these juvenile Chinook salmon downstream. And so in doing that, you've got the potential to pass other fish that live in the reservoir. So that includes things like kokanee. And, based on what we saw at Green Peter, they certainly migrated out of that particular reservoir in very high numbers. This drawdown is a little bit different in that it's not as close to the intake as what we're doing at Green Peter. How that's going to result in, how many kokanee actually leave versus stay in the reservoir, we're not going to know that with certainty ahead of time. It's going to be something we have to monitor as the operation occurs. Obviously, I think everybody's hoping that as many of those kokanee will stay in reservoir as possible. But I think there's a pretty good likelihood that some number of them are definitely going to monitor or move out of the project at a higher rate than they do now. They're moving out of the project now. I think that's something to also remember. That's happening currently, but it's likely to be a higher number with the drawdown in place. That's for sure.
Next question. To be clear, is the biological opinion on the deeper fall drawdown at Detroit Reservoir to support endangered fish passing through, referring to kokanee specifically?
This is Rich Pieskowski, fish biologist. The biological opinion we received from NIMS is not specifically covering kokanee. They are not a listed species. We analyze kokanee as a part of our SEIS. You will find our analysis in Chapter 3 and included specifically in Appendix K. If you have comments on those, please have those after you review them. We're generally analyzing kokanee as a resident fish species among other resident fish. And in addition to the previous question on quantifying, we do not include specific quantification of the numbers of kokanee leaving or other resident fish that might leave during drawdowns. There is too much uncertainty or lack of information for us to quantify the numbers leaving. So you'll find our qualitative assessment of the environment created and how many, what the general impacts are expected to be. Our analysis is focused primarily on the endangered fish, Chinook and steelhead.
Got about 4 minutes left. Any last questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat. You said Chinook and Steelhead, correct? Yes, that is correct. Upper Willamette, spring Chinook, and winter Steelhead.
Yeah, those are the listed species that are included in NIMS biological opinion. We analyzed in addition other listed fish, which is bull trout in the Willamette Basin. And then in the SEIS, as I mentioned a minute ago, we also are analyzing resident fish in general.
All right. I heard that kokanee recently came through Willamette Falls, which means they can survive and return if released, correct?
Yeah, so not only did they migrate above Willamette Falls, but so sockeye salmon were noted migrating above Willamette Falls this year. And then ODFW, who operates a facility down at the base of Foster Dam for the Corps of Engineers, collected over 500 adult sockeye salmon at Foster. Those fish came from the kokanee that were flushed out of the reservoir during the first year of the drawdown at Green Peter in 2023. So yeah, some of these fish that move out can ultimately come back. And in the case of kokanee, if they go out to the ocean, they're going to come back as a sockeye salmon.
For the endangered fish, has there been any improvement noted from the Green Peter drawdown?
Hi, this is Rich Pieskoski, fish biologist. We have been doing studies since the first drawdown in 2023. We have work that's continuing. Specifically, we have found that when the reservoir is in the drawdown phase and once it's below the pen stocks, Chinook going out with a relatively high survival rate, 70-some% estimated from the forebay downstream to the head of Foster Reservoir. There are additional studies needed to really articulate the whole effectiveness of the drawdown, understanding how fry coming in from upstream after being spawned and how they rear in the reservoir prior to exiting in the fall. Is it still an open question? And then how many fish may be leaving while we're drawing down, but the turbines are still in operation is still another question yet to be answered. That takes a few years to really estimate because each year the operations are varying. And so an estimate in any one year may not be representative of a whole range of different kinds of water year types.
Last question, since we're at time. Can you explain why they are called kokanee and also sockeye? This seems confusing. And Greg actually has answered that in the chat, but I'll let you go ahead too.
Yeah, it is confusing. So they're the same species. In the case of kokanee, they're a landlocked version, so they don't migrate out to the ocean. Whereas a sockeye salmon will migrate out to the ocean and then come back and spawn in freshwater. So they literally are the same species. It's just the kokanee stay landlocked and never migrate out to the ocean.
Thanks, Greg. And Kelly, I know you said we're at time. I just wanted to say a couple things quickly in conclusion. One, just a reminder, we have a repeat of this overview and session this evening at 5:30. So if there are things that come to mind, questions that you have, another opportunity this evening to ask them. But thinking back to Brent's question, this is enormously complicated issues, and the document itself can be difficult to orient to. And that is the reason we've structured the in-person meetings in the way that we have. For folks that are not able to get the answers that they want or want additional information to form their feedback, we've dedicated that time, and we will have people there to be able to go into depth and answer those questions for you, to just give you the very best opportunity to understand the analysis in the document. So focusing in on those meetings on the 6th of December in Detroit, and then the 2 meetings that we have in Salem is an opportunity to go into detail and have some face-to-face conversations with subject matter experts in those areas that are of particular interest to you on the supplemental EIS. So I do want to kind of remind folks of that. Thank you again for the time and attention today. We'll see some of you perhaps again this evening at 5:30 to be able to continue and answer the questions. And yes, Sean, the slides will be posted, and the recording, Kelly, correct me if I'm wrong, but the recording will be posted as well, correct?
Muted.
I think that was a yes.
Oh, yeah, we're unmuted. Yes, that's a yes. We will be posting both the slide deck and both recordings. So we do have a meeting this evening if you want to listen to all of this again, or know folks that weren't able to come this afternoon and would like to attend this evening for information purposes. And so both recordings will be posted. We won't have a recording of the in-person meetings, however, so you'll have to come in person and chat with us.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks for the question, Sean.
Yeah.
And thanks, everybody.
Yeah, and one last comment too. I know we've gotten some comments about it might be confusing to find out where the effects of the Detroit drawdown are within the document. So you'll find the effects in chapter 3 in each of the subsections. So from a water quality perspective, you'll see those effects described in section 3.5. From a drinking water perspective, you would see those effects described in section 3.19. So those are the subsections just right offhand. But each of the effects to a specific resource area from the Detroit drawdown are contained within the interim operations described within each subsection of chapter 3.
Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, everyone. Have a good afternoon.